Hey everybody, welcome to another Tanks replay. This one is by TA in the JPE 100. And he's ended up on Sacred Valley, which still appears in high tiers, unfortunately. Facing off against a team of mostly tier 10 tanks. Now I think this is the first replay I'm going to have up of the JPE 100. I have actually played it on test, but I wasn't able to get any replay-worthy games out of it. I can't remember if I put one up. I don't think I did. Or if I did, it would have been so long ago that it doesn't really matter anyway. But anyway, the JPE has a bit of a reputation. It's big, it's slow, it's impossible to miss, and its armor perhaps doesn't work as often as its drivers would like it to. With that said, it's got a very big scary gun that does 1010 alpha on average, and pens basically forever. Its accuracy is not so good, but you don't really need accuracy when your gun is this big. You just need to hit somewhere on the enemy tank, or even somewhere near the enemy tank, just to scare him away. But in any case, the JP does actually have somewhat decent armor. Its mobility is not good, but it's certainly not as bad as you would expect for something this big. And when it's played well, it can certainly be an absolute monster, as we are about to see. First bounce there, the enemy 113, and a second from the STA-1. Meanwhile, the 113 has lost half of his hit points already, and the STA is nearly dead. It would seem the Artie is focusing on the north up here. You can hear the shells coming in behind TA and hitting his teammates. Given a choice at all these targets, he goes for E50. Bit of a snapshot there. It doesn't look like the reticle is quite settled yet, but in any case he's able to just wing the lower front plate of the E50 and knocks a huge chunk of its hit points off too. Now, interestingly enough, that was actually a low roll. In fact, both of his shots so far have been low rolls. He goes in for a third. Unfortunately, the enemy JP just pulled into cover, but the E50 is still out in the open. TA goes for an upper plate shot there. Personally, I would have gone for the turret. You've got a much better chance going through the front of an E50's turret than its upper plate, especially when it's cocked back on a hill like that. But either way, it goes down to the friendly E4. Unfortunately for TA's platoon mate, the enemy Fatten just rolled straight through the center of the map and drove right up to him and killed him, which is not something you see very often. And TA gets his first high roll of the match into the enemy Foch, which is bouncing off of him meanwhile. So you can see that while the JP perhaps doesn't have perfect armor, it is certainly workable, and if you're able to angle it well and position it against terrain where you can sort of not quite side scrape out, but use the terrain to bait the enemy into making bad shots, the armor will go quite a long way. Fortunately there, for TA, there was a tank wreck right in front of him. The ruined friendly 103 just ate that shell. And he's now got to pay close attention to the map, as it looks like he's about to get flanked. The T-57 up there in the north is very nearly dead. The enemy JP rolls into the E4 and bounces. E4's shot goes in, but he gets hit by Artie, so TA goes to finish off this JP before he can reload, and is able to do just that. Meanwhile, the poor E4 is getting focused by the enemy Artie, and TA is getting set to engage the tanks that are now behind him. He goes for the Foch first, which bounces. Poorly aimed shot there on the Foch's behalf. It just winged straight off the right armor plate. He hit it more or less on the corner of the casemate. That's never going to be a good idea. The E4 meanwhile finishes off the Tiger 2. And very luckily there, the E100 shell whiffs into the ground The second Foch goes down to TA's gun, but he finally takes a hit. This one was a 53-55 shell in the back, so it's actually taken this long for somebody to finally damage him, and it was actually an SPG that did it. South isn't looking too good, but TA and this E4 have more or less cleaned this flank themselves. Finishes the E100 with a shot through the turret face. Much more safe of an option in this thing than going for the hull at that range, particularly as the E100 was turning. And now TA's got to find a way out of this sort of tank graveyard that has been built around here. He needs to get back to his base. It looks like the enemy are going to push on it pretty hard in a minute. There's nothing there to stop them except the E75, who appears to be stalling for as long as he can, but he's not going to last much longer. In the meantime, let's take a look at this gun. The heat rounds do obviously, 1050 alpha, not 1010. I'm not sure why I thought it was 1010. 420 pen. I knew it was some kind of weird number. And then you've got 299 for the AP. Now 299 pen will go through basically anything. The only thing that's going to defeat that kind of pen is good angles. I don't think there's a single tank in the game with thick enough armor to actually bounce that shell, unless it's angled, obviously. Perhaps the front of an E3 along the casemate, but even then, it's relatively flat, and I think I've seen JPs go through that before. Now, of course, the JP does have largely the same armor layout as the E100. Obviously, the casemate's a bit different because it's a casemate, not a turret, but the actual hull armor is pretty much the same as far as I'm aware. And so you have these fantastic skirts along the side of your tank that will actually eat a lot of incoming fire. They also help to reduce the amount of splash damage you take. So if you have a side shot at a JPE, regardless of what tank you're in and what gun you're using, always shoot for the casemate side, not the side skirts. You have a much better chance going through the casemate. Similarly, if you're presented with a frontal shot on a JPE, there are really three options. The first is the lower plate, obviously. If you can't hit that, the front of the casemate is an option for higher pen guns, but obviously not for lower pen ones. And then your sort of last resort is the little machine gun turret on the top of the casemate. Obviously from behind you don't need to worry about aiming, just shoot anywhere. The only real thing to keep in mind there is that the bottom rear of the tank is angled differently than the upper side of the, the upper rear of the casemate. Unfortunately for TA, he's in a bad situation here. He's got an E5 on one side, an E50M in front, and then two Arty all focusing on him. He knows it's pretty much over at this point. And sure enough, down comes the shell from the 53-55. All the same, it was a pretty good effort, a good demonstration of what the JPE can do when it's actually played well, which is something you don't see very often. Most of the people that play this are horrific. I don't know why more good players don't play it. It is a lot of fun to play, just because the gun is so stupidly large. You can really make people shit themselves. I've seen a couple of people who seem to like it a lot and know what they're doing, but by and large, JPE drivers tend to be pretty bad pubbies, and so this potentially very fearsome tank destroyer is usually not as much of a threat as you might think. A bad player in a JPE is very easy to avoid and very easy to kill because you just flank around them, shoot them in the tracks. Usually they're not carrying a repair kit, or they won't use it until it's too late, and so you can get around them and just murder them. But a well-positioned, well-played JPE, sitting on a corner or behind a wreck or something and making use of its mobility, what mobility it has, to shift that hull around and make sure it's always presenting you a bad angle, it can be a real nightmare, and it can lock down a pretty serious area of the map. Anyway, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as ever, I'll see you on the next one.